Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. In 1954, the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education overturned years of Jim Crow school segregation. But in 1953, one of my guests today enrolled at Paducah Junior College. He is Leon Biles Sr., and with him is Paducah historian and author and college history professor emeritus John Robertson to talk about this historic event, not just for the college, but for the state of Kentucky. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be here.
Let's begin with the historian, shall we, to give the historical background of this. John, were you in Paducah in 1953?
Well, yes, I was in Paducah, but I was not there with the college.
You were working on the railroad.
I worked on the railroad. I started here in '47. And then I started teaching part-time at the college. And
that's when it was downtown.
It was the original building downtown,
right.
yes.
Right. Well, give us a little bit of the historical background of the desegregation of the college here.
Well, I put a short summary of that in this book by Arcadia Publishing called Paducah Frontier to the Atomic Age.
I highly recommend the book. I have a copy.
And
I read that too, yes, very good.
What I have here is that, well, sort of summarizing it, it goes back to 11 people have been executed at Eddyville while a Paducah case was pending. So Paducah was one of the centers of rigid segregation. And this case involved a young black man who, defending the honor of a young black woman, decided he would teach a white man a lesson not to bother her, and he accidentally killed him. And they sent him to Eddyville before they even tried him. They tried him and found him guilty. Well, so this is sort of the atmosphere that was in Paducah. And picking up there, McCracken County officials ignored some rulings successfully until 1954, when Joseph Freeland, the attorney representing Curly Brown, the president of the local chapter of the NAACP, filed what was a pioneer use of affirmative action to force McCracken County to impanel blacks. Federal District Judge Roy Shelburne agreed not to issue the requested injunction, even though it was warranted when the county officials agreed to comply with the dictates of the United States Supreme Court to put African Americans on jury panels. Now, they found out that McCracken County had been ignoring federal law for years. They did not have any blacks on any jury panel. And had, even though the Supreme Court had mandated it, they just ignored it and got away with it. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the feeling that one gets here in Paducah. Well, now after the end of the Second World War, Paducah became the target city in the efforts of the NAACP to improve the conditions of black students in Kentucky. Mixing of races in school classrooms was not legal in Kentucky at the time. That was the Day Law, the famous Day Law that was aimed at Berea College,
right,
and said that you could not have the mixing of races in public schools. Well, Curly Brown of the NAACP reported in an interview with Glenn Morrell in 1967 that the organization decided to take action, and they picked Paducah Junior College because it was tax supported.
Tax supported,
right?
Yes.
And so that was their hook. The college was publicly supported and was subject to the provisions of the Day Law. So if they admitted a black, they were violating state law.
The Day Law, yeah.
And could go to jail and be fined and punished. Well, so blacks in Paducah do not have equal opportunity for a college education. Now, previous to that, the blacks did have teacher training. And of course, that was the
Old West Kentucky.
Old West Kentucky Industrial College.
West Industrial, yeah, industrial.
That provided teacher training. and also vocational training. But when it was taken over by the state and made into a vocational school, the college level courses went to Frankfurt. And so the state teacher training was Eastern Kentucky for whites in that part of the state, Bowling Green, Western Kentucky, to teach here, but the black teachers had to go to Frankfurt. And so their argument was, we have a public supported college here. Why don't we allow blacks to have teacher training available in Paducah? Well, now on September the 12th, 1949, Lee Powell and Joe Freeland, again as his attorney, appeared at PJC and demanded admission. Well, Dr. Matheson was a very liberal-minded person, but he was under the regulations of the law, the day law. And so he was looking for some way that he could kind of ease this out as a problem.
Yeah.
And so he examined the credentials of Lee Powell and found he was not academically qualified. And so he refused admissions on academic grounds. That avoided a conflict. Well, the following day, guess what? Joe Freeland was back with Fred A. Wilson, Jr., who had impeccable credentials. And so here the gauntlet is thrown down. And the college could not accept him without
breaking the law,
going to jail or something. And the NAACP was not going to back down. And so it was a test case. And in fact, Thurgood Marshall, who later became the first black on the Supreme Court, came to Paducah and helped prepare these cases. It was that important. And it goes through the court system as far as the Court of Appeals. That's the Sixth Court of Appeals in Cincinnati. And again, Freeland won. Now, it was close to being the case, Paducah Junior College integration, for the abolition of segregation.
So it could have been.
It could have
been.
It could have been Brown
Brown
versus
versus Board of Education.
Picked
Yeah,
Brown.
it was that important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was that close. It had gone through the Court of Appeals, and it was next on line. And because of that, some colleges, like University of Texas, did go ahead and integrate.
Sure.
So it had an impact, even though it was not the case.
Wow. Well, now you pick up the story. Growing up, as John was talking about, Paducah, while Kentucky is a border state, it was part of the Jim Crow South.
Yes.
Segregation was the law and the social order here. So what was it like growing up in Paducah, African American, during that period?
Basically, you have to remember that the political climate was like it was. For blacks in Paducah, it was like living in two different societies. You know, you go to the movie and you had to go to up in the balcony. You couldn't go through the drive-in except on certain days. Things like this. You couldn't go to Noble Park. You had to go to Stuart Nelson Park. So it's within this atmosphere that Curly Brown Sr. decided that he asked us, along with his son, do you want to go to PJC? And
how did you react to that? Was it kind of scary?
It was. I can't think of the correct word to use for it right now because it was just a bit confusing. I knew that they didn't particularly want us there. So I had to look at myself and decide, do I really want to expose myself to whatever? But we finally decided to do it. And it was interesting because it was just a matter of a few days after we graduated from Lincoln High School that we went down, Curly Brown on one side, Mr. Freeland in the center, and we went walking down to PJC. Now we had heard of a lot of things and you mentioned Dean.
Mm-hmm.
From my standpoint of view, Dean was in the hot spot because
Oh, yeah.
he had to placate his board of directors and all those other people like that, but yet he had to deal with this lawsuit. So here I'm standing and going down there. I'm going to face this person who doesn't want me there. And you must remember, it was summertime. It was in June, very hot. The very first day, he came in, and you know Dean was a very imposing type of fellow, you know. He says, I can let you go to school here, but I can't make these people like you. Okay, fine. He said, one thing I would like for you and Curly to do. He said, stay out of the pool until the people get to. Well,
Oh, that was a hot spot.
that lasted about 3 days because, unbeknown to the dean, I knew some Caucasian fellows that we had been going to the river and swimming, and they knew me. They knew I could swim. And it just so happened that I was passing the pool, and one of the guys in there had this game with water polo going. He says, hey, Leon, come here. And I says, okay. He says, and I happened to think that I told the dean I was going to stay out of the pool. And I says, hey, man, I don't have any trunks. Not a problem. I got about 3 or 4 pair in my locker. Now, what do I do? Because I've already told the dean that we were going to stay out of the pool. Here I am. We jump in this pool, and all of a sudden you get this feeling in the back of your neck that someone's watching you. And I kind of glance back up out of the pool, and who do I see standing in the doorway? It was Dean standing there. And he's looking down. He's a very imposing figure. He's looking down at us, and I said, uh-oh, I've done it now because I've given him my word. But he never said anything about it. And things went very smooth. Of course, I was amazed at some of the background that the city of Paducah had gone through prior to our getting down there. For instance, we later found out that one of the National Guard units was put on alert. There was extra highway patrol people assigned just because of us two. I thought that was amazing. I thought that was amazing. But now, again, summertime. Curly and I, of course, we grew up together. We lived basically in the same block. So we said, look, we're not going to take the same classes. So you take this class and I'll take this class. We don't want to be there all the time. Fine. It just so happened that one of the ladies, we had some teachers that were doing some, I guess, teacher work during the summer. And this one lady invited the class out to her place, lived out in county someplace, for, picnic, things like this. Curly came back cracking up. And the reason was it, one of the things she served was these watermelons. And the old he's sitting there and this lady brings all these big watermelons out and he's eating watermelons and really trying to keep from letting the people realize what was happening to him. But you got to understand this, One of the other things too, the park, and I've forgotten the name of it, right across where the convention center is now. There was a park there that had a tennis court.
Right. It was Schultz Park, but before it wouldn't have been Schultz Park then, would it?
I've forgotten what the name of it was.
Well, it's named for Raymond Schultz, or wasn't he?
Raymond Schultz was county judge.
Yeah. But this would have been before Raymond
Barkley
Schultz.
Park, too.
I think
Barkley Park.
I think
Barkley
that's right.
Park.
I think
okay,
you're right.
the kick was that it was. You must remember at that particular time we could not go to Noble Park. We could not go to basically the white parks. So Curly decided he wanted to play tennis because PJC had a tennis team Fine. He says, okay, where do they practice? Barkley Park. So here he says, come on, go with me. So here we are in this park, and all of a sudden you see the police drive around. They didn't say anything, but here we are. And I can't describe the feeling that went through my mind that, hey, look, these people are checking to make sure that we don't do anything. So it was interesting. One other thing I had to say, too, when we went down there are several of the instructors that stand out. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember was Dr. Smith still there?
Yes, yes.
He was
Smith.
Physics, physics teacher. Very, very, very interesting person. But in Dean, now, I said earlier that Dean had a reputation in the paper of being this strict disciplinarian type person. But somehow, and I don't know how he did it, he learned that I was taking flying lessons at Barkley Park. I did the Barkley Field. He calls me in the office one day, and I thought maybe I'd done something because, you know, he just don't get called to the dean's office every day. He called me in and says, Biles, I hear you're taking flying lessons. I said, yeah. He says, would you like to fly for the Navy? And I says, yeah, I think I would. Very important. Now, the climax of that was in '54, I decided that I wanted to go in the Air Force because I wanted to fly. So I dropped out of PJC and joined the Air Force. A couple of months later, I get this long letter from the Navy asking me to appear at Barkley Field to get off flight to go to Pensacola for flight training.
He had done it.
Amazing,
Yeah.
Amazing, you know. I really can't explain the feeling that went through me because here's this person that said, we don't want you here. But then on the other side, he's saying, look, how would you like to fly for the Navy? And he went through, it happened just like he said it was. But at the meantime, I was in the Air Force, and I said, hey, look, I'm in the Air Force, so therefore I can't.
Wow.
Interesting.
Dean was a lieutenant commander in the Navy Reserve.
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was. He was the commander of the local reserve unit.
Mm-hmm. And he couldn't, as a public official, take an official position, but he backed you all in so many different ways.
He did.
Do you remember about the class picnic? You want to comment on that?
I'll let you do that.
Well, when we decided to have the school had an annual picnic. Well, after they integrated, Dean solved the problem. We went over to Massac in Illinois and had our class picnics.
Well, so did the basketball team. Well, see, PJC had a basketball pretty good.
Oh, they were national champs.
Yeah, like Cotton Walker and a couple other people that was on it. Yeah. Of course, I think Cotton ended up being the principal at Paducah Middle School or something, if I remember correctly.
I think so.
That was,
so.
Well, the games mysteriously, the home games mysteriously weren't played at PJC. They were played over in Massac County after we started going to school there. So
wow.
I thought it was interesting.
Wow.
Just little things
just
like
little
that.
Thing.
Yeah.
That was moving around.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, after we started going to school down there, there were white people that actually came up to me, sometime Curly, walking down the street and says, hey, how you doing down there, Biles? I said, how do you know me? What's this business? I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. So how did your white classmates did you get along? How did that all work?
Beautifully. I didn't have any problems with anybody, which I thought was interesting given the tenor of the times.
Yeah.
Well, compared to other places where integration, let's
Yes.
like, well, in Little Rock, for example.
Oh,
Yeah.
Paducah, they handled it with some grace,
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
but it was not easy.
Right.
We saw, Curly and I, we saw the one side of it. We didn't know all this machinations that was going on around and in the background. But Curly, and he was, like I say, we grew up together. It was real tragic for him. He went to, after he finished PJC, I was in the Air Force. In fact, I was stationed in California when he wrote me a nice long letter and says, hey, you know, the draft is getting real close. Because, by the way, we had deferments to go to school. And he says, the draft board is breathing down my neck. What do you think I should do? And I said, well, you know me, I'm prejudiced. I like the Air Force. And he says, well, I don't know, Air Force, I've got to stay 4 years if I go to Air Force. He says, I think I go in the Army. So again, he had finished PJC, SIU, got his bachelor's degree, and they drafted him in the Army. Well, you must remember in the Army, some senator, I've forgotten who it was now, said that we've got these guys in the military that are low rank and have college degrees. So we need to make an emphasis on trying to get these people to use what they've learned. So now you got Curly. He has a college degree from SIU, and they sent him to clerk typist school when he went when he went in the Army. And so meantime, he was telling me all this, and they kisses. Fine, after this emphasis that this senator, I've forgotten who it was now, started pushing for it, they call him, his commander called him in and says, Brown, I've got a commission for you, but you have to stay in six years. And he says, no, I don't think, because he had made plans to go back to SIU to get his master's. Meantime, he's telling me all of this. Now, they finally sent him out to Dugway Proving Ground, and they put him in a physics lab. He's got one strike. He's in the physics lab, and the lowest ranked other person in there with him is a lieutenant colonel. And they're doing these experiments on they're taking like guinea pigs and things like this, and they were irradiating them or radiating them, whichever, to see what the progress is going to be. And these guys, when they get finished work, these guys will put on their bars and all this good stuff, and he go put on his little, and which created a lot of problems because the fact that he was working in the physics lab, he didn't have to do a lot of other things that you do in the military, like we had to do in the Air Force, you know, KP and things like this. He was exempted because of the job he had then. So, make the long story short, he went back to SIU, got his master's degree, and a few days before he was getting his master's degree, getting a job, he had a job set up in Chicago. And a few days, I think he had gone out to lunch or dinner or something like that, but ended up in a car wreck. That was very sad. He was
So close.
Very, very close. But you know, you're talking about the time at PJC. It was quite interesting. It was very interesting. The professors were very nice. They seemed to bend over backwards to work with us.
Well, they tried to be fair,
Yes.
but at the same time, I was there, you know, a little later.
You were on the other side of it.
Yeah. We still insisted upon quality.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And I think people like you prove that what we did was worth the effort.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
it was a tense period. I'd gone through something similar to that in the Marine Corps. In 51, 53, 53, we were, you know, when I first started, a black man in the Marine Corps was destined for 4 years of mess duty.
Are you familiar with Montford Point?
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize that. Black Marine Corps base. All black.
All black.
And that was
All
where?
black. Montford Point, just right next
And
to
they had
Camp
one
Lejeune.
of the best anti-aircraft units in the Marine Corps.
Yes. A lot of people don't realize that.
Wow.
There,
No.
yeah, there was a time that Marine Corps, they had black divisions.
Oh yeah, it was the
The
military
Air
was
Force,
segregated, absolutely.
Tuskegee. Well, you know who you heard of
till
Tuskegee.
President Truman desegregated the armed forces.
So
right.
that was
right.
a lot of. That's the reason I asked him about Montford Point.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know there was a separate camp though.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, separate but equal, yes.
Yeah.
Separate and unequal. Right. Right.
Now that
right.
you mentioned separate
Right.
or equal, see, I came from Lincoln,
Yeah. Oh,
and the only thing equal about Lincoln and Tillman was the word school.
School.
I'm
Right.
sorry.
Right. Right.
But
right.
if I may say about, you talk about the teachers at Lincoln, one thing that surprised me was I found out a little later on that even though they were teachers and they had master's degrees and things like this, they were making half the salary of comparable people.
Yeah, yeah. I was in teaching my Kentucky history classes, well, my American history classes too. When I do the Plessy versus Ferguson case,
yeah.
the one dissenter was John Marshall Harlan of Kentucky,
Yes.
and John Marshall Harlan, in essence, said correctly that separate but equal is separate and unequal, and we all know it. And the fact that he was a Kentuckian, I found that fascinating. Of course, Harlan County, that's a very old Kentucky family.
Well, now, Harlan
Oh,
had
you
a
hear
role
about
in
Harlan County.
well, he had a role in the day law. When they went to the Supreme
He
Court,
dissented in that case too, didn't he?
he dissented, and the law was written by Justice David Brewer, who was from Lawrence, Kansas, and John Marshall Harlan from Kentucky objected.
Right. Because
And
the court upheld the day law, did they
they
not?
upheld the
Right.
day law
And he
in
dissented
that.
in that case too.
And so even though he was from Kentucky, a slave, had been a slave state
Right.
and all of that,
Right.
he was one of the leaders. That and well, who was the other Supreme Court justice from Louisville? Frankfurt?
Oh, Brandeis. Well,
Brandeis, Louis
Louis
Brandeis.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So
So they played a significant role.
indeed. I hate to say this, but we're out of time.
Oh.
We'll have to come back to do this again sometime. This was
Okay.
terrific. Thank you all for coming
I'll
very
do
much.
it.
My
Yeah.
guests today, Leon Biles Sr. and John Robertson. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.